I'm going to read bios of our presenters. Our first speaker, Connie Carlson, works as the market opportunity development specialist for the Forever Green Initiative, a University of Minnesota extension position that's supported through the regional sustainable development partnerships. Her work for FGI is to support and facilitate ongoing market development for the range of crops within the FGI portfolio. She's working closely with the University of Minnesota researchers, breeding and testing of new crops to build connections and market opportunities for growers, processors, and businesses seeking to incorporate FGI innovations. Her work is funded by the Walton Family Foundation. Connie comes to the Forever Green Initiative with more than 20 years of professional experience in product development, media relations, strategic sales, marketing, and communications. She also serves as the president of the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota and lives in Buffalo, Minnesota with her family. Next, after Connie, we'll have Riley Gordon. Riley graduated with honors from Brandon University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in physics. Mathematics minor. In fact, he's a brainy type of young man. In the spring of 2014. Then in 2017, he completed a degree program at the University of Minnesota, obtaining a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and environmental emphasis in water-related topics. As an engineer, Riley will be applying his skills he gained through his education and related industry to assist in ORI's broad range of projects and initiatives. He primarily works out of the co-products lab in Waseca, Minnesota, but will also apply his skill sets by delving into projects related to all four focus areas that encompass ORI's work. And finally, our last speaker here, Jason Robinson. By the way, the acronym for ORI is Agricultural Utilization Research Institute. And both Riley and Jason are part of that institute. Jason co-leads the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute's food program as director, business development of food. As one of the first ORI contacts with food clients, he works to translate their needs to specific action and oriented problem statements and matches them with ORI's expertise and infrastructure. He's skilled at providing food startups with the tools to build a sustainable business model, including definition of their defensibly unique value proposition and product, process, and packaging development technical expertise. Additionally, Jason creates and executes public domain initiatives, focusing on transforming Minnesota's rich agricultural products into sustainable food products, businesses through science. And Jason's had a long career in corporate research and development at General Mills. Jason is a certified Scrum Master, executive board member of the Plant Protein Innovation Center at the University of Minnesota, and a member of Upcycle Foods Association Certification and Standards Committee. Jason earned an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And with that, we'll turn the program over to Connie and sit back and enjoy the show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present our work to your audiences today. So thank you, NCI, Neil, and others. Just a brief introduction. Here I am standing in a Kernza field from this summer. I work for Extension, the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, as Neil mentioned, and my work is really connecting Greater Minnesota with the research and experts at the university to drive sustainability projects. And I'm focused on that market and network development of the crops and cropping systems in the Forever Green Initiative. Next slide, Matthew. So I want to set the tone here, or set the stage for what the situation is with agriculture today and why Forever Green exists today and what we hope to do in our research work. And then paint the picture of the partners and work that we're doing together to advance this mission. So I think many of you are aware that agriculture in Minnesota has changed drastically over the last 50+ years. This image here kind of illustrates that very clearly. That patchwork quilt that you see on the left is the diversity that most farms were sponsoring in, in the 40s. 30 years later, fast forwarding, you can see the drastic difference that the crops have, it's down to just 1 or 2 crops on most farms across Minnesota. Next slide. And so 63% of Minnesota's agricultural landscape is now corn, which is illustrated on the left, or soybeans on the right, as you can see from this 2017 graph. And that really leaves really growing biomass and root structure on the landscape for about 3 months and leaves the soil brown for the rest of the year. Next slide. And that creates a scenario where there's opportunities for nitrate leaching, erosion, and missed opportunities for that potential biomass production, especially in those shoulder seasons, which you can see in those red bumps on this graph. So the annual grain production is that big green bump where most of the activity is happening, but there's some opportunities that Forever Green and our researchers think we can capitalize in those shoulder seasons. Next slide. Because we are facing big challenges. We have snow in the winter months that is covered with dirt because of erosion. We have hypoxia issues in the Gulf of Mexico, and we have contaminated water in our drinking water wells across the state. That image there on the far right with the red dots, those are contaminated wells across Minnesota. So we have some challenges in front of us. Next slide. The University of Minnesota, we have driven much of that agricultural innovation for over 100 years. Many of the crops that we just mentioned have come out of the university. We are also driven to co-create new solutions to face some of these challenges and create a future where our communities across Minnesota, our growers, and eaters and businesses can thrive. So I want to share with you one of those solutions. Next slide. Yes, the Forever Green initiative. So this is a research program at the university that is developing new winter annual and perennial crops intended to return agriculture to that diversification that we saw in that earlier slide, with the intent and that framing of creating new food and agricultural products, new economic opportunities, fostering social well-being, and protecting and fostering ecosystem services. So protecting our water, soil, and creating habitat. Next slide. This is what our portfolio looks like. Today, we're going to be focusing on Kernza, but we have 16 crops in this portfolio with new winter hardy annual oil seeds, such as winter camelina and pennycress, hardy woody perennials like hazelnuts. We have elderberries and alfalfa and winter field peas. So there's a whole range of crops that are really going to be the tools for our growers and businesses to work with moving forward. And our research platform, can you go back just one slide? Thank you. Our research platform is transdisciplinary and a community university driven. So we have experts from genomics and breeding and sociology and economics and people like me in extension who are working together to implement and adopt these crops across Minnesota. Next slide. So my role in all of this is really sitting in a bridging space. So I sit and listen and learn from the researchers who are working on these new crops and carry that information out to partners across the state, country, and even internationally to form these collaborations and partnerships to really drive that implementation and adoption. Next slide. And we like to call our work sustainable commercialization because it's really focused on developing and fostering a coordinated, innovative process that's very regionally developed and managed with that framing again of addressing economic, environmental, and social sustainability challenges. So all of those pieces are part of this work. And I sit in that sort of that green middle area there with those little green people, where I kind of, I again, listen and learn and carry that out to the end users and partners. Partners like AURI, who will be talking about their work in greater detail too, to move all of this forward. Next slide. So these are some of the tools in my toolkit that I use as I do my work. There's a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement. Every day there's conversations with growers, supply chain partners, nonprofits, policymakers, really to build that trust, build out that partnership, and build out that collaboration between all of us, bringing our expertise to the table. There's a tremendous amount of adaptation and resiliency that's required, lots of troubleshooting, risk sharing, and hustle. And then this communication and storytelling. So today is a great example of that. I'm carrying what we are working out to you, the audience, to show you what we're working on and help you see where you might fit in the equation of this work. And together I take a lot of these pieces and they're applied in our models and pilot projects that are funded through various sources to really test and create these platforms for that collaboration to really happen in real time. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about one specific pilot program, which is the Eco Implementation Program, and that's focused on our Kernza work. Next slide. So let's dive into Kernza. Here's a field view of what it looks like out in a field. I'm about 5'6", and I think when we took this picture, it was probably crouching down a little bit, but it can get higher. And researchers are working on reducing that height. But here's just a great view of what Kernza looks like out in the field. Next slide. And so what is Kernza? Well, that word Kernza is the trademarked name for the grain that is harvested from intermediate wheatgrass, which is the scientific name for the plant. That trademark name is owned by the Land Institute, which is a nonprofit based in Kansas that has committed to developing perennial agriculture. And they've been working on Kernza, researching it and developing it and improving it for about 20 years. The University of Minnesota partnered with them about 10 years ago. And we were we were the first to release the first commercial variety of Kernza in 2019 called Minnesota Clearwater. Intermediate wheatgrass grain is similar to wheat, but it has a different protein quality. It's a little bit higher, and it doesn't have that same rising action that you might see from a traditional wheat in baked goods. There's about 2,000 acres of Kernza currently planted in Minnesota and about 4,000 nationally. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Next slide. So here's a snapshot of what that impressive root structure that Kernza is known for. It's a plant that is has about 3 years worth of growth. Farmers can plant it and harvest. They plant it in year 1 and they harvest it in the following year for about 3 years. And it develops this very impressive root structure that you see here. This soil pit was dug this summer on a 3-year plot. It's about a 4 to 5 foot soil pit, and those roots kept on going. And you can see on this image on the right here, a comparison of that root structure with annual wheat and how it is quite significant, even within a year's worth of growth. Next slide. And Matthew, we'll do 2 more clicks. There we go. Thank you. So we're taking at the university, we're taking that idea of that root structure and understanding how we can use that strategically to again address some of these challenges we have with soil and water. What you see here on this graph is the nitrate leaching that happens typically during production. The corn production is that top bar, that gray bar. Switchgrass is the middle and Kernza is on the bottom. And what you can see from there is that there's significant leaching early in corn production, but Kernza keeps it steady at somewhere around 0 or near 0 through the entire growing season. And that is a 3-year production. So you can see that there's really significant potential for protecting our water. And Matthew, if you could click one more. Thank you. So that slide again, I'm bringing up of Minnesota and its a well contamination. We have strategically planted Kernza where those stars are to really identify what it can do to protect our water. And that is part of our research and some of the pilot programs that we are currently working on. Next slide. Specifically, that eco implementation program. So we have received funding from the Minnesota legislature through the Clean Water Legacy Act, about $500,000 to support the scale up and de-risking of Kernza production in Minnesota. And we are working with growers to plant Kernza in those vulnerable wellhead areas, those pink areas that you see on this map. And some of the pieces of this program is paying farmers up front for their participation, and then working with them after market to sort of fill in the gaps, especially if they had major crop losses or had issues with getting their crop to the market. So again, de-risking, building that awareness and expertise in Kernza production and increasing that supply available to us. And this project also funds technical assistance for the growers, which is critical to ensure that they are successful in their production. And that team is a team of experienced Kernza growers and Minnesota researchers who are there to address and work with growers so that they can be successful. Next slide. Here's a quick snapshot of what Kernza production across Minnesota looks like as of this summer. We'll probably have to update it in the next few weeks because acres were planted, more acres were planted in September. So we expect this to be for a few more dots to be on this map. And those dots are where Kernza is growing. The diamonds are where licensed seed distributors are located. So we have 3 companies that are licensed to sell seed. And the stars are where processors we are working with are coming online to clean and get that grain into the market. Next slide. And if you want to read any more about what you've just learned about our drinking water work, please feel free to go to the Greenlands Blue Waters website and look for this document, which will give you deeper insight into all of this work and our partnerships with growers and even end users to make this work. Next slide. And it's important because our industry partners see the great value in this work, especially as they communicate to their consumers about what they are doing to mitigate some of the challenges that we face with climate and soil and water. And a great example is General Mills and their soil health communication on their blog right here, showing with their customers how they value that soil health story. Next slide. And I just want to give you a brief snapshot of the thinking we are doing and some of the products that are already out there around that contain Kernza, and the supply chain that we're building to bring that product to market. So I won't go into great detail because there's a lot to talk about here, but I think you can see the range of partners that we work with, from individually owned restaurants and distillers all the way to a newly released cereal that is on shelves across the country and Whole Foods stores across the country. So next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the stakeholders and partners in detail who we work with and who are critical to all of this work. A major development in the last 6 months has been the Perennial Promise Kernza growers who have assigned their papers to become a co-op, and they are actively involved in growing, mentoring, and marketing Kernza across Minnesota, and with growers across the country who are starting to come online. Next slide. Here's a great example of what it looks like to work with the growers. And there's even a snapshot of Riley, who will be talking to you next. on the left there. We went with some growers to a seed cleaner this fall to talk to them about coming on board to clean. Riley showed some of his samples and they compared it to the seed cleaner samples, and really great results. And those two people sitting in that picture with Riley are growers who are part of this conversation. After that conversation, we all met at a cafe. And this image here is those growers with Riley and then my colleague Colin, who's part of the university supply chain and development for Kernza and the Forever Green crops. So it's this whole collaborative, communicative effort coming together to build out Kernza's supply chains and markets. Next slide. So Riley and I think Jason will talk a little bit more about this, but I just want to highlight that the tools that have come out of ARI have been really incredibly helpful for all of my work. And they have developed these application bulletins that we have taken forth to partners across the country to share with them how to use Kernza in brewing and baking and how to clean it. Next slide. And it's been helpful for partners such as Perennial Pantry, which is the first company in the country to provide directly to consumers whole grain Kernza, flour, and most recently a pancake mix. They launched their company about 1.5 years ago and are continuing to be very close partners in all of this work, innovating, processing, cleaning, and getting Kernza directly to consumers. Next slide. And here's a couple snapshots of how those partners are sharing information on Kernza with their audiences. Delicious pancakes. The Artisan Naan Company out of St. Cloud is sharing the Kernza naan that they have made. The Seward Co-op is sharing it. And Long Root Ale out of is a beer that was released by Patagonia, one of 3 beers over the last 4 years that have been launched by Patagonia. Next slide. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention probably the biggest news that we've had in the last month. Whole Foods has declared Kernza a top 10 food trend for 2022. And they did it in collaboration with this Cascadian Farm cereal that they released and is available on Whole Foods shelves across the country. Very exciting. Next slide. So just a snapshot of where Kernza is in our commercialization efforts and just the progress we've made even in the short time that I've been part of this work. I joined in 2019. And when I came on, there was virtually no supply of Kernza for us to work with. And since then, together with AURI, we've distributed well over 3,000 pounds of grain for R&D to millers and bakers and others across the country. We now have close to 60 growers across the country. When I came on, we probably had a handful. And we have more processors coming on board to really build out that supply chain. And you can see that with that product list. We have larger companies coming on board and a nice range of stakeholders across the markets working with Kernza because they can access it. Next slide. So Forever Green, we're proud of our innovative, multidisciplinary and collaborative work. We continue to develop and test sustainability solutions. We are built on partnerships with stakeholders across the country. And I need to mention that all of this work is really geared towards training a next generation of scientists and professionals who can continue to tackle these challenges and help us build a future where we all can thrive. Next slide. And Matthew, if you can click forward about 5. So I wanted to share the diversity that we're really hoping to see in the future as these crops build out. And 2 more, Matthew. All right. So hopefully in some time when I speak to you again in the future, we can talk about all the other places where many of our other crops are in production across Minnesota and maybe even across the country. Next slide. My contact information, and I will also provide that in the chat after this. And next slide. And just a shout out to the organizations that have supported this work and provided the funding to make sure it happens. Thank you to these funders. And with that, I will pass it on to Riley.
All right, thanks, Connie, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to NCI for giving us the opportunity today to share about our Kernza work. Connie did a great job giving kind of a overview of the whole Kernza world, and we're just going to dive a little deeper in, Jason and I, today on some of the value-added work that we're doing on the research side to look into value-added products with Kernza on the back end. And we are very grateful for NCI and their working relationship that we have with them. And they've been a big part of our research as well, which I'll share a little bit more about the work that they've done to help us out with our journey as well in understanding more about Kernza. But first off, I just wanted to give a little bit of a background on AURI. So who are we? We're the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, and we're here to develop basically value-added products from ag. We do that with technical and business development staff here in Minnesota.
Well, it looks like Riley may have a bad connection, so I can pick it up from here. I'm Jason Robinson. I'm in business development at AURI, and what Riley was saying is that you could think of AURI, the Ag Utilization Research Institute, as a nonprofit organization that is really funded by the state of Minnesota to provide technical and business support to businesses that are looking to advance agricultural innovations. We like to say that our work doesn't really start until the animals are milked or slaughtered or the crops are harvested and in the bin. But our mission is really all about driving utilization of Minnesota agriculture. Matthew, you want to go to the next slide? We work across multiple focus areas, bio-based products, co-products, food, and renewable energy. And we provide services across the state with physical locations in Crookston, Minnesota, Marshall, Minnesota, where we have our meat and food lab, and then in Waseca, where we have a co-products lab. Our St. Paul facility was on the campus of the University of Minnesota, but this is a little bit of an older slide. We don't really have locations there anymore. Looks like we have Riley back. So Riley, I'll turn it back over to you to kick off the Kernza work.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, my internet just completely stopped, I think, there for a second, so I appreciate you taking over. But okay, thanks for the overview of AURI. And so getting into kind of the Kernza projects that we've been working on over the last couple of years here. So we started off with our first project partnering with the University of Minnesota on an LCCMR project. So that was the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund that funded our work there. And then we came into a second project with the Stearns County Soil and Water District to further understand Kernza. So the first one, we were really just kind of building an internal knowledge base at AURI. NCI played a big part in that, helping us kind of analyze the grain, look at it, kind of what characteristics the grain has, what type of products might it be able to go into. Did a lot of work kind of investigating the cleaning and dehulling process and understanding the nuances there, and figuring out kind of what pieces of equipment are needed to get that grain basically from the field, from the combine into a usable and food product for the market. And then we kind of took that information, went into our second project, and we did a lot more kind of market focused research where we looked at food product development. We looked at what end products could be made from the material and actually running trials, and then going out into the world and doing pilot projects with different businesses, getting grain into their hands, providing them technical assistance and business assistance to get Kernza into finished products onto the market. So next slide. So here's just some of our collaborators, of course, the Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation District and University of Minnesota Forever Green program, as Connie mentioned, and just all these different companies. This is not limited to these. These are just ones I was highlighting, but C2 Renew, we worked with them to develop a plastic with the Kernza straw and PLA resin. And then Buehler, Bratney, Forsbergs, these are all seed cleaning equipment manufacturers working in their pilot plants to test out different screen sizes, different methods of cleaning the screen to kind of refine that process. And then Northern Crops Institute, of course, they did milling work and food product development for us and provided a lot of really great information on this grain, as they're experts in the wheat industry, and this grain is very related to wheat in many ways. And then we had Healthy Food Ingredients up in Valley City, North Dakota. They currently have the only at scale cleaning and dehulling facility. So we had them clean a large acreage, a large amount of the acreage that came out of the Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation District project. We had about 36 acres come out of that, which resulted in about 16 to 18,000 pounds of grain. And we sent the majority of that to Healthy Food Ingredients to have cleaned and dehulled for our pilot projects that we'll discuss a little bit in a bit. And then Montana State did some malting work for us, and Sprout Labs is a subsidiary of Perennial Pantry. So here's basically from the first project. This was kind of our main deliverable, and Connie kind of gave a foreshadow of this earlier of these application bulletins that we came out. We came out with 4 of them. So one was on the cleaning and dehulling process at large, just what the kind of the general process is, some drawbacks to where the grain is, and where the University of Minnesota looking at seed genetics and stuff and getting some more consistency in grain size will be huge for this process. And then on the back of these are 2-pagers. These are just kind of showing the front page of them. So my contact information will be displayed at the end of our presentation, and feel free to reach out, and we can pass these along to you so you can have the full copies. But then also we did Kernza and baking applications and kind of the opportunity there and some of the potential drawbacks. And then next slide, we did grain just as a general grain, and then we did for brewing as well. So we've kind of take a look at what the whole gamut of where we could use Kernza, and looked at some of the opportunities and some of the information that end users could find useful, and getting these out, and with Connie's help and people at the UMN and Forever Green and others, getting these in the hands of end users and interested parties, just to kind of educate people on some of the opportunities that this grain can hold in end products. So next slide, Matthew. So just touching on kicking off the second project. So we did, based on that information we learned in the first one on all the analytical properties, we kind of take a look at some of the products this could fit into. So NCI, this was their work where we contracted out with them, and they did a lot of work on the flour milling. And then they did different inclusions in pastas, crackers, tortillas, baked goods, sourdough breads, all those types of things. And they did various inclusions. So with Kernza, it's not ever going to be, very rarely would it be included as 100% of the flour mix, but usually as an adjunct, as it has a little bit of a different gluten structure than general wheat does. So it doesn't, in things that have to rise, it doesn't do as well. So it kind of works as an adjunct in a lot of these cases. So looking at different inclusion levels to kind of find that optimal inclusion rate for these different products is what the work was. And they delivered an excellent report to us in August, I believe, that provides really good information that we can now pass out to interested bakers and end users. Next slide. So there's just the cover page of that food product development report. We also partnered with the Wheat Marketing Center. They did work on doing refined flour milling. We found out a drawback to it due to the small kernel size. It's about 1/5 the size of wheat. So going through the traditional roll break method of flour making and refining, they're only seeing about a 43% yield at the end of the day, which is probably less than half of what you'd see with wheat. So that's kind of a drawback, and the reason why we're kind of focused mainly on Kernza as a whole wheat flour at this point. And then we've partnered with RAR Technical Center in Shakopee and got them several hundred pounds of clean dehulled grain for them to run in their pilot malting facility. And they were able to do some pilot brewing as well. They were seeing about a 93% germination rate in their malting units, which is excellent and what you'd like to see. So we've got some really good results from them, and also a really nice report back as well. Next slide. So down in our co-products lab, which is where I office out of, we did a lot of looking at the straw and the hulls for different opportunities. So I mentioned we did look at making a plastic from the straw with PLA resin with C2 Renew. We took a look at the hulls in the straw as bedding, looked at the ammonia absorption, the moisture absorption, and kind of compared that against other beddings that we've analyzed in the past. We looked at it both from fuel and feed uses as well. So what's the BTU value of it, chlorine content, ash, that kind of thing. And then we looked at the feed, basically the total digestible nutrients and, or the TDN and NDF, neutral detergent fiber. And we compared it against corn and soybean at current pricing. And based on those things, we kind of came up with theoretical market values for those products if they were to go and compete with basically corn and soybean out on the market, and then also on the fuel side competing with wood pellets and competing with natural gas and propane, where that value would come in theoretically in the market. So we have all that information that we'll be delivering in our report, and then also just refining the cleaning and dehuling process. And we were able to set up some equipment through our research, and there was some equipment dollars under the grant where we set up a small cleaning and dehuling facility down in Waseca where we can basically showcase that process and provide small amounts of clean dehulled grain to end users. So here's just a snapshot of that. It's in we got a new food grade room about 6 months ago that we've commissioned. And so this is sitting in one corner. We have an indent cleaner, an aspirator, and then an impact holder there on the bottom left. So that's generally the process to get clean and dehulled grain. We do not have a color sorter, which is generally preferred in the process as well. But again, mostly for demonstration purposes. So, and then there's just a shot of the indent running. You can go next slide, Matthew. And just kind of a show of the cut there of that. This is a separation of the in-hull grain from the dehulled grain, and this is before aspiration and the sieve. So, but that just kind of goes to show you the cut. And there's our state-of-the-art Kernza storage facility. We have all our Kernza in various states in 55-gallon cardboard drums where we can keep any unwanted rodents away. And we have about, I think, 5,000 pounds of grain in various states at this point. Connie mentioned we've probably passed out, I don't know, 3,000, 3,500 pounds of it at this point to different end users and through our different trials. So we've been putting it to good use, but we still have a pretty good supply there to supply to folks that are interested. So next slide. Yeah, and so the other half of that second project, as I mentioned, is kind of working with these small businesses and existing businesses that are using basically that are bakeries or breweries that are interested in using this and providing them small amounts of grain to test out in different products. We've got a number of these pilot project clients that we've been working with and had a lot of them with lots of interest, and some of them have actually products out on the market now, which we're proud to announce. What we provide is business development assistance, and then also product and process development, whether it's how to clean and dehull it, or whether it's what inclusion to use in whatever product that they're trying to make. We can provide that information, passing out our 2-pagers and just being kind of there as a technical and business resource for them as they think about what it means to include Kernza in their products. So yeah, at this point, next slide, and I'll pass it over to Jason just to kind of wrap things up here.
Great, thanks, Riley. Well, hello again. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about our pilot projects and then close us out so we have a couple of minutes for Q&A. As Riley mentioned and talked about our pilot projects, now that you've heard about all the work that AURI and the University of Minnesota has done to establish Kernza as a viable cropping system with real environmental impact, the next step is all about creating demand in the marketplace so producers can realize a cash benefit and thus encourage even greater adoption of Kernza as a cash crop. To do so, as Riley mentioned, we supplied clean grain, technical and business resources and expertise, and network connections on pilot projects with local businesses throughout the supply chain. Matthew, can you go back to the last slide, please? Thank you. we were really initially focused in the Minnesota Stearns County region, which is a designated groundwater wellhead protection area. Our goal was to demonstrate local impact by driving local demand and local profit in a virtuous cycle. So as you can see, we worked with a number of local businesses. Connie already mentioned Artisan Naan. Artisan Naan is a small bakery in St. Cloud that specifically was interested in Kernza to grow their business and has since transformed into a big part of their business that they're actually now selling wholesale Kernza Naan in the Twin Cities. Swanee White is a miller that Riley identified in Freeport that is a small-scale whole grain miller that has been working with us to mill Kernza grain into a flour for use. And then we've also worked with a number of other organizations that, particularly breweries, that have been playing around with brewing Kernza into various styles of beer, including a cream ale, a blonde ale, hazy IPA, and even dark beers. But even more importantly, was for us to find and put together the various puzzle pieces of a new supply chain that really tied that supply to demand. As an example, not only for Kernza here in Minnesota, but throughout the nation, and can also be used as an example for other cropping systems in the Forever Green pipeline. Next slide, please. But it's not enough to just do the work. While we still have pilot projects and other work ongoing, we are actively sharing learnings with the intent of widespread adoption and demand via webinars, field days, and a quote unquote soon to be available report of all the findings. Additionally, we have a third grant project through the LCCMR, and just for clarification, that's the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, that's focused on drying, Kernza shelf life, and new pilot projects. Next slide, please. And as I close out before our Q&A, however, I would like to spend a minute on why this work is more important now than ever before. And it's related to how consumers have adjusted their concept of value in the age of COVID. I pulled this graphic from the Hartman Group, which is a consumer surveillance organization that the food industry uses for trend research. And they've made this publicly available. What this graphic does is it shows that historically, consumer focus has been on money and resource management as they make purchase decisions. In the consumer mind, what we'll call big global problems like plastic in the ocean or climate change were not issues that the individual felt they could really impact. In a sense, it was always happening somewhere else. Today, however, that mindset has shifted, in large part because COVID-19 showed the individual consumer that they need to deal with a quote unquote big global problem because it showed up right on their doorstep. So responsibility became as important as resource management. And consumers have recognized that there are consequences to their unfettered consumption, whether it's climate change, loss of biodiversity, plastic waste, or food waste. As such, consumers now have begun to really influence change through their purchase decisions, which means that the story of Kernza and its impact on the environment is more important now than ever before. So our job is to help consumers be able to vote with their dollars, so to speak, by making sure that we have a safe and reliable Kernza supply chain that consumers can access easily. Last slide. As Riley had mentioned, our contact information is here at AURI. You can always look us up on auri.org. Our contact information is readily available and publicly available, for better or worse, right there on the website. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. Matthew didn't speak today, but Matthew is our esteemed project manager and it keeps us all in check. And we are continuing to do great work on Kernza and would love to have any feedback or thoughts. So I think with that, our content is complete. And Neil, we can turn it back over to you for any Q&A.
You bet. Thank you very much. That was, I learned a lot more than I thought on Kernza, and I thought I knew a little bit, but this was really an excellent series of presentations. we do have a couple of questions here. Will you, Ori or Forever Green or any of your constituent companies be exhibiting at the Expo West Natural Food Show in March? Anybody want to take that?
Connie, why don't you go
Well,
ahead?
We have been talking about it, but it's probably a bigger scope of work than what Jason, Riley, and myself would do. But the Perennial Promise Growers Co-op that we mentioned has brought on some marketers who are helping them move their inventory out into the market. And those marketers actually have connections with the expo, and they're talking through how they can have a presence at those expos in the next year in a way that really meets their needs. We're also talking about the Craft Brewer Conference that's going to be in Minneapolis in April of next year too.
And real quickly, I can't stress enough how important it is that we need to continue to drive awareness and demand for Kernza. But just as important is being able to fulfill that demand.
Yes. Yes.
And that is, I would say that that's probably one of our primary focuses right now, is on making sure that once that customer orders a 50-pound bag of Kernza flour, they can actually get that 50-pound bag of Kernza flour. And that's something that we're continuing to work on with the Growers Co-op and with the various partners in the supply chain. But our intent, and I know that the Minnesota Department of Ag is also going to have what they call a Minnesota Pavilion at Expo West. And there has been talk of presenting a, let's say, a regenerative agriculture view of Minnesota, of which Kernza and the various Forever Green cropping systems are likely to be highlighted. So if you're going to be
Very
there,
good.
come and visit. I think I'm going to be there as well.
Yep. Just for folks' information, generally that Expo West in Anaheim on March 8th has about 70,000 attendees. So anybody that's the who and who's in the food industry. Another question here. How do we get a hold of the publication that shows protein content and other analytical information on Kernza?
Yeah, so that would be through me. You guys can reach out to my email. I can put it in the chat here too. And just, if you'd like it, I can just send it over. Those are public facing documents and can just send you all 4 if you're interested. And that has all the analytical information on the protein content and everything. So Jason already threw it in there. So thanks, Jason.
Very good. There you go. Another question. It was very interesting to see Connie's talk about corn and soy production in Minnesota, which is a major industry. How has been your conversations with corn and soybean producers with regard to kind of having Kernza fit into their operation?
There's a lot of talk right now, and not just with Kernza, but with some of those oil seeds I mentioned. Because those oil seeds the main premise behind those oil seeds is working with the existing cropping rotations to incorporate a new one into those rotations. So there's a lot of interest in that winter camelina and pennycress, because then it also will provide that additional stacked revenue for growers. They can get a new oil seed, they harvest that, and then a few months later, soy could come around. So, and then, some of these commodity groups, they're really looking for additional resources and tools for their growers to continue to be successful in their enterprises. So I would say that the conversations have been very productive, especially over the last year or two. And we're working with a number of them on developing pilot projects to extend those partnerships.
Sure. It was really interesting also to see all of the private interest there is, the companies that you've got involved, major companies and even smaller companies. But with that, have you done any economic analysis with regard at this point or any future point as to the, you might say, economic viability of Kernza? That's probably a key point is,
Absolutely.
can the consumer afford it? In other words.
Right. Right, absolutely. And that's actually been foundational to the work even before I came on. There's been enterprise budgets that have been developed. And in basic terms, what they're finding is that with Kernza specifically, it is a dual use crop. So it is a crop that can be foraged, it can be hayed, and there's a grain crop there as well. So when they do the math, and I'm just going to be basic here because I'm not an econ person, but it pencils out for the grower, especially if they have that dual use within their enterprise. And as supply grows and as the efficiency in the supply chain matures, yes, we will get Kernza to a place where it can continue to be more affordable. But all of that partnership work we talked about includes that conversation. So when the growers are at the table and they're also in conversation with those end users, there can be a real conversation about parity and what's a fair price for the growers and what's a fair price for those end users. So it's all part of that equation. Absolutely.
Right. And with that, do you have any cost or returns information for producers? In other words, production costs, returns, profit per
Yes.
acre. And where do
Yes.
they find that? How can they get that information?
Yeah, there is actually a spreadsheet that's been developed for producers to plug in and put in their specific enterprise details, even equipment and assets and things like that. I don't have the URL at the top of my mind. So whoever's asking, please send me an email and I can send you some additional resources on that work. Because, that the economy question, the economics questions, it really is top line in all of this work.
And you can see, let's see, I think we have Connie's email is in the chat chat room. So you can go right to there and get her email. We had a couple of more related questions. How many years of production can you get out of a single planting? And what is the yearly decrease in yield?
Right. Yeah. So we call it a perennial. But if you're going to get nitpicky, it's not a tree. So it doesn't have a 30, 40 years lifespan on it, where we are seeing production for about 3 years. The yield drops off at year 3. And what we're seeing for average yields is somewhere around 500 pounds. We have growers who've had less than that, and we've had growers who have had significantly more than that. But we see around 500 to 800 pounds per acre. Now, research is underway to absolutely increase that yield and absolutely increase that seed size. So researchers are hoping that the university will be able to release a new variety within the next 2 years. And we are seeing some nice forward strides in meeting those goals around yield and seed size.
So per year, let's say you had a value of 100 for year 1, what would year 2 be? What and then year 3?
Right. So year 1 and year 2 are generally around 500 to 800 pounds per acre.
Yeah.
And it's hitting the market at somewhere, that market price is still being developed, but we're seeing around $3 a pound, $3.50 in that range. And then it's year 3 where, like I said, it drops off, and it could be, depending on growing conditions, 300 pounds per acre. And there's a whole conversation here about the farmers learning how to set their combines to keep that yield in their combine. And there's a lot of learning and experimentation and adaptation that is still underway. It is not a silver bullet for anything, and it's not a perfect crop yet. So there's still work to be done on it.
But any other further agronomic questions or economic questions, please feel free to reach out to Connie.
Please do. My colleague Colin, that is his expertise, and he has a lot of resources at hand too.
Just another agronomic question. Does Kernza require annual fertilizer applications after you plant it?
That's actually research that is underway. to really determine what the what that looks like.
Okay.
The organic growers I know do apply manure in the fall, and then there's growers that I believe are applying nitrogen, but at minimal amounts. But that is research that is underway around what the best management practices are for that, especially since we are looking at this as a crop that's going to scavenge nitrogen. So the question is, you know, how much nitrogen should we be applying when we want to use this crop as something that reduces nitrogen leaching?
How does the yield compare to like other heritage wheats like einkorn or, you know,
Wow.
or
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I know that. I want to say, like, in comparison to Kamut, it's
Mhm.
pretty comparable.
Okay.
But I believe that the other heritage grains, and that's actually a comparison that I haven't done recently, so I don't have that top of mind. But I'm going to assume that it's probably less even than some of those heritage breeds because they've been around longer.
Right. Okay. We talked a little bit about you going to Expo West. Have you had any international interest in this? And I imagine if the more trade shows you go to, the more you will get, but.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are pockets of research across Europe with researchers that we have been working with for many years. The Land Institute actually, hosted a event over, I believe, in Lund or across globally to foster those conversations. And then, again, my colleague Colin gets inquiries sometimes daily from researchers and growers and companies who really want to work with this grain and figure out how to bring it into their product development and into their communities.
Sure. And we had a question on how is bread making quality for milled flour and how to cope with the reduced milling yield. And I think, Jason, you answered some of that.
Yeah. I can quickly chime in here. Kernza contains gluten, but not at the same level as annual wheat flour. So you can use it to make bread, but we recommend blending Kernza flour in with traditional wheat, traditional bread flour, probably at about the 15% level. I wouldn't go any higher than 25%. You'll see a bread that results in that it's very dense and doesn't rise particularly well, but works great at high levels in unleavened products or flatbreads. I made some really tasty Kernza cookies. The Kernza naan works really, really well. And so that flatbread approach, we've seen it used in pizza crusts and other baked goods that don't require significant rise.
Okay. I think we're kind of running out of time here, but maybe we'll have one more kind of general question here. Actually, people are talking about food shortages around the world just because of supply chain issues and whatnot. But then we also kind of alluded to how important is the term local or Minnesota grown with regard to Kernza? Anybody want to take that?
Jason,
I
do
can,
you want to talk?
yeah,
Go
sure.
ahead.
I can start there. I think what we need to keep in mind is how consumers have adjusted what they find important. One of the things, again, I'll go back to one of my final comments related to the impact of COVID. COVID has exposed vulnerabilities in the supply chain. What that means is that local is more important than ever. What it meant before COVID was supporting your local communities and keeping the dollars here, so to speak. Now, there's a level of the products are healthier. I know where it's coming from. There's a transparency component here that is really important, and it's become even more important now. But with Kernza, what's really interesting, and if you recall the graphic that we pulled up, there was a circle with arrows on it. And I think it's really important to recognize that with Kernza in particular, local Kernza demonstrates not only local impact on a supply chain and a financial point of view, but also local environmental impact.
Yes.
Right.
And the work that we've done with the Stearns County Water District has been really important because they're able to demonstrate to consumers in that region that your purchases not only keep dollars here in the region, but they also improve the groundwater that you're drinking.
Mhm.
And they improve the wellheads. So Kernza as a local story is important, but Kernza as a national story is becoming even more and more relevant to the consumer consciousness. So don't discount local, but I think we'll see even more importance placed on the use of Kernza because of the impact that it has on groundwater protection and obviously as a cover cropping system as well.
And then just as a personal interest, do you think that Kernza, you can make a 100% Kernza pasta with this material?
It was
Riley,
done
go on.
at, yeah, it was done at Northern Crops Institute.
Yeah.
You guys
Yeah,
made
I think
100%.
I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, and it was good. It was probably like we tried 100% of each of the products that we did. I think we did 5 or 6 of them, and I think, in my opinion, the pasta was the best one. It was very similar to like a whole wheat pasta, and it tasted very similar to that, which I personally, it's a personal preference, but I like that kind of thing. So I think it was really good, and it was possible. Again, you don't require that rising, as Jason mentioned, in that type of product. So I think it worked good in the pasta. Yeah.
I will say, just to add on to that, it's not going to taste like the cremette or Barilla pasta that you get from the grocery store that's not whole grain.
Right.
It is very similar to a 100% whole grain flour. There's no real difference between that and 100% whole wheat flour. It's very brown. It's got specks. It's grainy tasting, to put it mildly. But it's a good whole grain pasta.
Good.
Yeah.
Good for
I've
you.
done it in my kitchen. It turned
There
out,
you go.
it turned out good in my kitchen. Yep.
There you go. Well, I would say thank you very much to our presenters. This is excellent. We had some really good questions.
Yeah.
And the future's bright for Kernza. We're really excited to see the chicken and the egg here. The demand and the supply, and we're really impressed as how you're matching those two up, the supply and demand, and you're kind of harnessing those together so that so it's a kind of a smooth development of this crop. So. And we really appreciate it. And I think with that, I think we might have a couple more. Okay. Nope, I think we've pretty much exhausted our questions. Very good. Okay, thank you. And anybody who has any further questions, contact our presenters or Ori directly, and you'll get all kinds of information. So with that, we'll jump off and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Yep, bye-bye.